Hello, welcome to Well-Behaved Women. My name is Kyria, and I am joined by Lauren. We are your co-hosts.
Howdy, howdy.
And we are here this week to talk about another not very well-behaved woman.
And we're really excited about this one. This is the first one that we've kind of researched together in a way.
And this is definitely one that's really close to my heart right now because I am feeling a lot of
trepidation.
Laborer trepidation and frustration about interacting with capitalism as a whole. So
there may or may not be a movement going on. Not a big deal.
It's fine. But yeah, we're excited for this episode. We really both kind of did a lot of prep for it. So we're excited to bring it to you guys.
Yeah. So this week we are going to talk about just a really badass woman. And it is actually going to be a 2-part episode. So this is going to be kind of the first big chunk of her life.
Mm-hmm.
On this year in history, the Iron and Steel Institute is founded in London. The periodic table of the elements is first introduced by Dmitri Mendeleev. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association.
Okay.
All right. So we're in 1869.
Mm-hmm.
Emma Goldman was born in what is now Lithuania on June 27th, 1869, into an Orthodox Jewish family.
Really quickly, I'm so sorry. I want to interject because maybe you can tell me something about this. I always feel like you're smarter about these things. What is the at the top of Emma's Wikipedia page, it has like her birthday as June 27th, and then in brackets it says OS June 15th.
Oh, I looked that up for a minute.
And I have it up. I have just a little blurb about it that says it indicates a dating system from before and after a calendar change. Julian to the Gregorian calendar.
Yes. Because there were various European countries that still used that old style of dating system.
So since she was born in what used to be what is now
Lithuania, and it was kind of like a yes, and it was the Russian Empire.
Was maybe a little bit further behind in terms of adopting new calendars or something.
Exactly.
Okay,
I've actually seen this in a couple of different articles, to do with the Czech Republic too, I think.
Okay, so like that kind of whole block of countries switched over at different times and stuff. Okay,
but that's still really weird to me because you'd think that if it were a different date, it'd be like a vastly different date, like 2 months difference.
Right, because that was the difference of what was added to create the Gregorian calendar. Anywho.
Such a strange, weird. Yeah. who the fuck knows?
Yeah, born in Kaunas, Russian Empire. Interesting.
So her mother, Toba, was a widowed mother of 2, Helena and Lena. And by all accounts, Toba had really deeply loved her first husband, and basically whatever love that she had for anyone kind of died when he did, which is not great. So she remarried this man named Abraham Goldman, and it was called a mismatch from the start. Abraham, he was abusive and surly, and he used Toba's inheritance from her first husband for a business that immediately failed.
Oh.
They were poor, and what was worse, Emma was the 3rd daughter of Toba, and disappointingly not a son. So she had 3 younger brothers, one of whom died at 6 years old. But basically, Goldman wanted a son, and she was the son he never got, which was great.
Jeez.
So I don't think anyone could say that what she had was a happy childhood. She was a rebellious kid and earned a whipping from her father often, because that's just what you do, right?
Jeez.
Just whip your kids. So she gave,
and then mom was kind of checked out as far as I'm understanding.
Yeah, she gave up on looking to Toba for comfort because she herself was heavily abused and basically super checked out by that point. And the fact that they were in this religious family, it was kind of just, there's a lot of rage in some of those families, and it's a lot of it is religiously justified, especially against the women. He apparently had a lot of issues with like he had a lot of kind of Madonna whore type issues with Emma and Toba both, I think.
Yeah. And coming into a marriage with that, like where the woman already has 2 kids and expecting a Madonna image, like you're already setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah.
So he's irritated about being married to this person to begin with, it feels like.
He had to take in 2 kids that weren't his. And then he was basically like, well, I'll take you guys in because you're not going to get a better match. Like who else is going to take you?
Right. And then on top of that, their first kid was another girl.
Yeah. And I can hear him dreaming.
Oh boy.
Watch out. We've got Tanner back with us as co-host, the dreaming co-host. But yeah, basically, I mean, she has no prospects. The only thing that she can offer by way of, advertisement is here's all the inheritance that I had from the husband that I love very deeply.
Right.
It's just not great. So the 2 older sisters kind of knew what was going on. And while one of them turned into like this mother character, the other one basically kind of went opposite. She was just super cold, unattached from everyone, all of that stuff. But all together, like all of the kids tried to shield themselves from the abuse, from like the worst abuses of Abraham, who himself was dealing with a cold and loveless marriage and was very sexually frustrated.
Yeah.
Like there's no relief in that. And
this is just a very unhappy family all around.
All around. There's just not happiness there.
Yeah, like mom and dad are miserable and that trickles down to all the kids.
Exactly. When she was young, they moved to I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these town names, so forgive me. When she was young, they moved to Papia, where Abraham worked at an inn. And while Helena and Lena had to work, Emma actually got to stay home and became friends with one of the servants that they had named Petrushka, one of the servants at the inn.
Okay.
This awakened Emma's erotic sensations for the very first time. Ooh. I had a girlfriend for the first little time. While in that city, she also witnessed someone being flogged with I think it's pronounced a knout. It's this, basically it's a really big multi-whip scourge thing that it can have holes in the pieces of leather, or it can have like nails stuck through the pieces of leather, but just a bunch of them, you're getting flogged.
Okay. So like a flogger of some sort.
Basically, yeah.
With like instruments at the end of the thingies as well.
It can.
Jeez.
Yeah. Wow. It'll either be tied into knots of leather at the very end, or have other implements in it. But yeah, the goal is pain. It's pain, right. and public pain, public humiliation. So basically at a really, really young age, it's kind of seeing this and being exposed to this solidified her lifelong aversion to shows of violent authority.
Okay.
This is important for later.
Great. Yeah. Foreshadowing.
So they moved again, and in her new school, she dealt with all sorts of shit kids should just fucking never go through. So, like I said, she was rebellious, and so she was a disobedient student, and she got hit a lot with rulers. One of her teachers tried to molest her and was fired after she fought back.
Amazing.
Her religion teacher didn't like her attitude and refused to sign paperwork that said that she could go on to secondary school. Basically, you can't graduate because you don't have the right attitude for it.
Jesus.
Yeah. One teacher could hold her back from all that.
Right. But like her grades, like her education was fine. It was just a teacher.
The attitude
with her.
Yeah. I've had teachers like that where I'm like a fucking straight A student and I'm falling asleep in class because I got 3 hours of sleep the night before, and they don't like my attitude.
And
so
you just don't like me. Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're determined to just embarrass. I actually had a school counselor. I don't remember what his name is, but fuck that guy. He would try to give me detention for having a backpack that wasn't like mesh or plastic.
Oh yeah. Like see-through.
yeah, my parents, they got me this like bright green aloha print, like big flowers on it, and they embroidered my last name on the back, and it's just so fun. And I still have that backpack. I love it. They got it for Christmas because I told them that I wanted to fit in with the other kids. I was tired of having a mesh backpack, so I wanted an LL Bean mesh backpack, which was the cool thing to have. I didn't get the mesh one, but this one has lasted me much longer. But people got pissed, like teachers and stuff got pissed because you're only supposed to have these see-through things. And I became the enemy of like at least 2 teachers and a school counselor.
Wow.
Because of that alone.
I became the enemy of my 8th grade science teacher because he swore I was chewing gum, and it was like banned in his class. And like, to be fair, I was chewing gum like several times when he caught me, but he sent me to the principal's once and I was not chewing gum. And he said he swore I was. And he said he saw green gum in my mouth. And my mom fucking went up to the principal's office. She was like, my daughter chews Trident cinnamon. Like, so I know this is false.
The color is what gave it away.
Yeah, she was like, my daughter may chew gum in class, but not on this occasion. Take this right up. Take this right up away. Because my daughter only chews Trident cinnamon at this time in her life.
Bravo. That's wonderful. So oh my gosh, that's great. So she had this really, really shitty set of teachers, but there was one kind of bright light in that area. She had a German language teacher who kind of took her under their wing, and they would loan her books and they would take her to the opera and basically just really encouraged her love of German.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't, I mean, it was all bad. It was all the fuck bad, but there was one time. It's like that Miyazaki thing of even in a shitty life, appreciate the teeny tiny little things. And this was the little thing.
Oh, for sure. Like this is like fiction, but have you seen The Queen's Gambit on Netflix?
I haven't, no.
Oh, okay. Well, she lives like this kind of like terrible life in this like girls' school, but then she starts playing chess with like the elderly janitor. And it's like, oh, there's my little light.
Yep. Yeah, you gotta figure out what makes you happy when everything else is shit.
I'm trying to think of a single teacher in my life that would have taken me to the opera. I know that things were different in the 1800s, but just like no teacher would be like, let's go to the opera.
Okay, my music teacher, Mr. Eldawan, he would have, and it would have been like a whole class trip, and it would have been awesome. Like he was amazing. I hope that he is retiring and fishing in happiness. He was fucking awesome. And then Ms. Morgan, but she was biology, so I don't think there was a reason to go to the opera. She was just that type of person, I think.
I say that, but then like my Latin teacher took a group of kids to Italy and Greece, so that's not true. I'm a liar. I guess for me, like I know that the opera isn't a casual thing, but it just sounds like something you do in town with a teacher. Sounds like more novel than like a teacher organizing an outing. I don't know. It's just very interesting, but I'm glad she had that outlet because everything else seems to be shit. So
yes, fairly shit. So they moved again, which took her away from this German teacher. And because Abraham just couldn't keep down a job, all the kids basically needed to go to work by this point. So Emma is an early teen and she's working in a corset shop, but basically she fucking hated it. She was like, I really, really, really hate it here. And she begged her father to let her go back to school. So he responded by throwing her French book into the fire, telling her, quote, girls do not have time to learn much. All a Jewish daughter needs to know is how to prepare gefilte fish, cut noodles fine, and give the man plenty of children.
Gross. The worst part is the gefilte fish.
I know. How is that I hate that is the most like insulting part right now.
Like, ooh. I'll cut the noodles fine and have lots of children, but I am not preparing gefilte fish.
Ugh. Just
terrible.
Yeah. Awful. He attempted to arrange a marriage for her at age 15.
Mm-hmm.
And she had to fend off advances already from like officers and other men in the corset shop. And one man took her into a hotel room and committed what Goldman described as violent contact.
Jesus.
Yeah. She was raped. Absolutely raped. And it was fucking awful. She was stunned by the experience, overcome by the shock at the discovery that the contact between man and woman could be so brutal and painful. She felt that the encounter forever soured her interactions with men.
Jesus.
But this whole time she had been learning. She was, she wanted to read and actually get involved in her community. She was very, very interested in the political turmoil of the time following the assassination of Alexander II of Russia by the nihilists, which I don't know much about. But basically, at that point, she kind of adopted this nihilist attitude and determined to escape the fate that basically was just going to be she was going to be another Toba if she stayed where she was.
Right.
She was going to be stuck in another loveless marriage. She was going to get beaten. She was going to get abused. She was going to have to spit out kids that she didn't want.
Yeah.
She was at a crossroads. So when her sister, Helena, was preparing to move to New York, her sister, Lena, had already moved and was there with the family. So Helena was now moving that way as well.
Okay.
And Emma begged to go with her. She was like, please let me go and please let me live there with them. I can, work on stuff. And Helena was more than willing to take her. She even offered to pay for Emma's passage to go over there.
Okay.
And Abraham, of course, refused. He was trying to sell her off. He was trying to marry her off, and he wanted to keep her close.
Yeah, well, because also bringing another dude in, like maybe he has some funds or something, because he's broke, right?
Yep. Having a daughter is like it's a form of currency that doesn't pay off until they're marrying age. But now she was marrying age,
right?
And he had no money. Yeah. So Emma was not deterred, and she threatened to throw herself into the Neva River if she didn't let her go. So faced with the ultimatum of a dead daughter close by or an alive one far away, he finally relented and let Emma move to the U.S.
I do love this, though. Like, I do not want to minimize how she's feeling at all, because this life sounds absolutely horrid.
No,
I don't know. Awful. I don't know 16-year-olds that have dealt with life. Well, I don't know them personally, 16-year-olds that have dealt with lives like this. But if I only heard this line where it's like, I'm going to throw myself into the river if you don't let me go to New York.
What a 16-year-old thing to say.
Yeah, I'd be like, wow, what a 16-year-old girl. But it, like, with everything involved in it, of course, like, it makes sense. But it is funny that she was like, I'm going to throw myself into the river. And he was like, fine, I believe you. Go. Like,
yeah. Well, and it's because this is like kind of the flip side of that thing in the media that we see. Okay, so all these Disney princesses, we see them have like kind of slight existential crises, and they're like, what is to do with my life? And they fling themselves or they run away or whatever.
Yeah, go explore. So, like very Rapunzel.
Very Rapunzel, and kind of for shallow reasons that kind of just make the fairy tale just have some sort of driving plot. A little decision makes this, fairy tale come true. This woman, like the flip side of that is that this shit does happen, and it is deserved. Like these people have to make these threats to escape these situations, because this is the flip side of that coin, is when they're in that abusive situation, when they're in that abusive home, they have to take dramatic action to escape.
Right. This is what that decision looks like when it's not an animated movie, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. This is real life.
Right.
So she and Helena,
to New York.
Yeah, they went off to New York. They arrived at Castle Garden December 29th, 1885. And a year later, those parents and the brothers joined him.
Oh, okay.
And they joined him because there was growing anti-Semitism going on in Lithuania at that time.
Oh, wow.
It was almost like people didn't like Jews from the beginning.
Right. I mean,
Something.
have you listened to the Black Plague episodes? Have we talked about this already?
Yes.
And when Marcus brings up the like anti-Semitic sentiment from then, I was like,
it's always been around.
Really? Like that's
it has always been there.
I had no idea, and that's very bizarre to me. And I am grateful that anti-Semitism literally does not make sense to me. Like, I don't know where people come up with it.
Yeah.
But also baffling that it goes back that far. Yeah, that's a very confusing and complex thing to me, and I don't think it's ever okay. I just had no idea that it went back that many centuries.
And it goes back further.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jews have an extensive history for a reason. They've been persecuted from fucking get, and they have all of history to show that this is not a one-time thing. People just hate the Jews.
Yeah. I don't think that will ever stop being confusing to me.
No, it will never stop being baffling, and it will never make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So she's in New York. She's living with Helena, Lena's husband, her parents, her brothers. It's a crowded house.
Oh gosh. Okay, yes. So they're all living together.
So she takes a job as a seamstress, and she's working over 10 hours a day and earning $2.50 a week, which adjusted for inflation is about $71 a week. When she was denied a raise, she quit and joined a smaller seamstress shop. It was there that she met Jacob Kirschner.
Okay.
They were like this cute little nerd pair. They both loved books, and they both loved dancing, and they both hated factory work.
Okay.
So they had kind of a short courtship, and after about 4 months, they married, and he moved in with all the Goldmans.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
The problem started immediately. The wedding night, he couldn't get it up, and Emma discovered that he was impotent.
Okay.
Yeah. Not a great thing to discover on the wedding night. So that led to distance between the two in their relationship, and things kind of spiraled out from there. And Jacob would even threaten to commit suicide if she left him. So after a year, they divorced. But again, Jacob threatened suicide, and she came back to him for like another 3 months. And finally, she had enough of his bullshit and was like, okay, you're going to keep doing this. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going back home.
Right.
Her parents and her family decided that living with a man you're no longer married to constitutes loose behavior. Fuck you, you're out.
Jesus.
Yeah. So they left her out with $5 and a bag of her shit and a sewing machine.
Wow.
Yeah. Basically completely disowned her. Not disowned her, but they refused her from the home. She was not allowed to come home anymore.
Right.
So Emma had been keenly aware of the changes in the labor relations during this time. And while she and Jacob were drifting apart, she became more impassioned following the executions of the Haymarket affair in Chicago. So we're going to talk a little bit about the labor. This is going to be a heavy labor relations episode.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start talking about that now.
Okay.
So by the 1880s, people were pretty overworking 60-hour, 6-day work weeks for really shitty pay. And in 1884, the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor's Union held a conference that stated unanimously that on May 1st, 1886, that would be the first day enacted with a new 8-hour workday limit.
Okay.
1886. Right. May 1st, 1886. 140 years ago. Right. This is we're still fighting for this. We're still fighting for it. Just let that sink in for a moment. We're still fighting for this goddamn 8-day work limit, but still hasn't happened.
Yeah, so, I mean, and this ties into what we were saying when we were talking before we actually started recording. So this is 1886. It wouldn't be until 1940 that the Fair Labor Act was passed or expanded to give us the actual 40-hour work week. 1940.
Yep.
So that's 54 years after this 8-hour thing enters
the dates are going to be pretty important in this, especially because they're just so unfairly recent, and they're also it's also about stuff that we're still fighting for today.
Right.
That still hasn't happened fully. May 1st, 1886 would be the first day enacted with the 8-hour workday limit. As that day approached and labor hours hadn't changed, workers began to strike in support of the movement. Around the US, anywhere between 300,000 to 500,000 people participated in this strike.
Okay.
Chicago was the city leading the charge, and it held rallies, really large rallies, when the strike started on May 1st.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of May 3rd, workers were frustrated with the strike breakers who were more than willing to cross those picket lines, and they decided to confront them outside factory gates at the end of the shift.
Okay.
So they're like, hey, fucking scab, what do you think you're doing?
Right.
So police got involved and people got shot. And incensed by the injustice of all this, people put out flyers announcing a rally the next day to discuss the poor reception of police at what was supposed to be a peaceful strike and a peaceful set of rallies.
Mm-hmm.
So the next morning, the cops invaded another peaceful rally, one that had been so calm, people lost interest in, and they just left. Like, it was so boring that people were like, we're good. I'm going to go get some coffee.
Okay.
So when the cops showed up to that one, the speaker assured them that they were merely demonstrating their right to gather and that they were peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone threw a bomb into the crowd and killed 7 police officers. Yeah. Things devolved from there, gunfire being shared between the sides, neither of which ever admitted to starting it. The point was, this was a massively upsetting conclusion to what was supposed to be a positive change for workers everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it resonated around the country with people like Emma, who were also sick of being taken advantage of by employers and factories that didn't give a shit about her outside of her earning potential.
Right.
So in her newfound homelessness, she decided to go to the major city around her, where she could join others who shared in her views on anti-authoritarian behaviors and anarchism. She mm-hmm. went back to New York City.
New York. So what's happening elsewhere?
Elsewhere. This one actually is going to be different because there's so much going on, and so, like, you know, in all of these sections, I'm kind of going to break it out by decades in her episode. So we're going to have a few of those. Mm-hmm. But kind of, it's to give context. Like, there's so much context needed for Emma to understand why she has these views. You have to understand exactly what's going on all around her at this point.
Right.
So this is the 1880s version, elsewhere. Mm-hmm. The anarchism movement was popping in New York City. Mm-hmm. It was one of the many cities actively involved in the labor movement. The Industrial Revolution, like, this was just 40 years ago. The first unions in the US are railroad unions, and they're not even formed until 1863. These are really recent changes, and those unions that are finally starting to actually build and be created are butting heads, and they're not getting along, and they don't want to join with each other. So there's a lot of, like, fighting to kind of get on top.
Right.
And they're just barely trying to get their shit organized. So nothing is getting better for workers yet.
Right. Yeah.
It's somebody
else trying to have power. Like, the union has power and not the owner of the company anymore. But it's like, but you're fighting with the leaders of this other union instead of fighting with my company. Like,
yeah,
you're not doing me any fucking favors.
The dues I'm paying you are going to your beefs with a company that I have nothing to do with. I'm paying you to bargain for my company and me.
Yeah.
Not to have beefs with other unions.
Exactly. Yeah. It seemed like it was like so many laborers were tired of being taken advantage of that it's like, oh, labor unions seem like a good idea, but that it also left openings for other people to take advantage of workers just under a different act, basically.
Yes. And this, so we're at the beginning of the labor union movement, and like every fucking thing, every movement, there is always the snakes in the grass, the people that are like, I can take advantage of this and get mine while pretending that other people are getting theirs. And that's kind of where union busting propaganda kind of comes from, is that there are some unions that don't deliver on the things that they promise, or that, you know, set unrealistic expectations, and it's just a way to bring in a lot of money and not actually have to spend any of it. But that's not the majority. But
absolutely.
But at this phase, you've got just as many of those as you have the good ones. And they're all fighting it out, and you can't figure out.
Because it's new. And
it's new.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And fucking chaotic. So between 1881 and 1905, there were 37,000 strikes organized by workers' unions.
Wow. Okay.
This became a fairly common way to deal with companies. Most were fairly short. Some were violent and unsuccessful. It wasn't a perfect system, but they were trying. And some of them were actually making work-life balance a priority. Like the unions themselves would offer all of these incentives. It was like joining a fucking club, like a country club. We're going to give you all of these other by joining this union, we're going to advocate for you, and we're going to give you all of these activities to do.
Right. Like by joining this union, you also, like, not only are you employed here, but you get season tickets to Six Flags, or, you know, like, I don't know that that's what exists at this time. But like that might be something comparable now. Like you get to go to the state fair always. Like you have that day off. Like that's
we have family day this day, and there's these job fairs, and we're going to have, you know, people that are dedicated to like helping people that are members of this union find new jobs and get new training and have certifications coming in. All of this stuff,
and like move up.
Yes. This is also still around where we're working like 60 plus hours for shit wages. So unions are starting to kind of have to learn how to do the math for, these are reasonable demands for a company that is so profitable. We can cut into a very small portion of those profits to make the lives of all of our workers way better.
Like infinitely better.
Yes, that was the goal.
Sure.
But again, still, none of this was super, super effective. The wealthiest 2% of American households owned more than a third of the nation's total wealth. Yep. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
Yes. The top 1% owned 51% of the nation's property.
Yep.
The fat cats are very goddamn fucking fat.
Yeah, definitely.
They're morbidly obese. On top of that, America had the highest rate of accidents in the world around the turn of the century. Too many new workers, no policies to protect people. We've got minimal levels of training, and a really big company can just go like, oops, he slipped. There were, you know, it was chaos out there. It was just an accident.
Yeah, like OSHA standards aren't set and stuff like that. Like,
or in the attempt to set OSHA standards, like people purposely didn't do things the right way. When you have OSHA standards that are actually coming into practice, then there's people that don't want to follow those policies. You've got, I mean, we still deal with that in companies to this day that are constantly struggling to be in compliance and just
absolutely.
Oops. And it is.
We also saw, I think it was 2018 or 2019, when Trump was wanting to do away with a lot of like safety regulations that he said were, I cannot remember this in full detail, but I do remember him like throwing away binders of regulations because he said that it was making stuff like unproductive. And I just remember all of these like posts coming out, like those regulations are written in blood.
I was just going to say that. People literally died because of the fact that someone wanted to cut a corner somewhere because it was going to be cheaper.
Right.
People died for this. So these guidelines, they're there for a good reason. And what does it save you? What does it save you by not following these protocols?
Right. Like 4 cents or whatever.
Yeah. You know? A little bit of productivity.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're spending way more on accident fees and repair costs and all of this shit that has to do, like if your equipment gets wrecked because you're not following guidelines, is it just cheaper to throw money at that than
Right.
follow guidelines?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't make any sense. The US was bubbling over with this labor movement of people trying to gain more reasonable hours and better pay. They wanted to go from 57 hours a week down to 40, make a limit on the 8-hour day. It really wasn't a lot to ask, like at all.
Right.
In any way, it's not a big ask. But the extreme disparity in the wealth levels between business owners and the working class, the poor conditions and the shit wages, the number of accidents, and the fact that they were all just too poor to live in safe areas. All of these things were just roiling about into people's minds. And it wasn't one set of businesses. It's not one industry. This is everywhere in the country. This is across every industry, everywhere, because it was just shit most places. Anywhere that was developed that had a town had been taken advantage, had been set up with a business in that town. And that was who was making a lot of the money.
Right. The owner of that business was the one.
He is the fat cat in that town.
And everyone else is not.
Yep. Because again, there's always going to be people in the world that will take advantage, that will want the power. The unions had finally started taking a foothold, but it inspired people for more. Thus, there grew an anarchist movement in most industrial heavy cities. It was into the swirling vortex of unrest in the lower class that Emma Goldman entered. On her first day in New York City, she walked into Saks Cafe, which was a known area for anarchists and radicals to gather. It was there at the cafe she saw Alexander Berkman for the first time. Okay, last podcast reference. Hit the moments where those, like, the people kind of come together and they meet their little loves. I always love that Henry always sings, "At last, my love has come along."
I was about to make a slight last podcast reference only because it's it's just crazy to me how much some of these things in history overlap. I was just recently re-listening to the Billy the Kid episodes, and like the Lincoln County War that ended in 1881.
Yep.
That's 4 hours.
Old West kind of shit. Yeah. And it's exactly
like 4 years before Emma arrived in New York. It's just wild. Like, history is so short, and so much happened in only like just a little chunk of time. And how young our country is in its most recent form.
Well, and people talk about how it's like, oh, it's this old country because 1776. All right. 1776 is when we started the revolution. We didn't end it really until the 80s. And then we were building the country. So we really only got to like have a start of a country in the 1800s when things started kind of actually getting written down and shit.
Yeah.
So 220 years old. That's not enough time to be establishing things, but all of these things are happening on top of each other in the same new country. It really is like it really was the Wild West, and things were coming together out of fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Because it was still kind of all new land. They were still figuring out laws. They were still figuring out regulations. And so these labor movements, again, they're written in blood. People died.
New Mexico was not a state when this was happening.
Exactly.
Like it's just crazy. Yeah, we're babies.
Yes,
we're babies, and yet we have so much inside of this little baby country that has all happened on top of itself. Partially because we're so big, like compared to like European countries, right? You know,
and we're so young,
huge.
We're still so young in comparison to them too.
Yeah, but like. We're just so huge, and there's so much more Americans that like all of this stuff can go on because there's enough people and space to support all of these events happening at once. But it's insane.
And it's crazy
insane that it is all happening in the same country because it's so big. Like Billy the Kid's life and Emma Goldman's life could not have been more different, but they were happening almost at the same time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like that's crazy.
Very much. And not only that, they're leading vastly different lives, but like you're also seeing parallel stories about things that are happening around the country.
Right.
You've got
People just
movements that
wanting
are
to
popping
make
up
it.
here and there, and they're around the whole country, not just in these one little areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Berkman. She meets Berkman.
Berkman. It was like sparks at first sight. She had been underappreciated her entire life. She had been in a shitty marriage, working for pittance, almost married off to her father or off by her father. She was just really fucking overtired and had nothing. So she comes into this cafe and meets a man who immediately he takes her in and he invites her to an event that very night. He's like, "Hey, we're having a gathering and you should come if you're into this anarchist movement."
Mm-hmm.
So they attended a speech by Johann Most, who was an editor of a radical publication in the area.
Mm-hmm.
She loved what she heard, and Most, he immediately took her under his tutelage, and she learned everything she could about the radical movement.
Wow.
So Sachs kind of became her place. Johann and Alexander kind of became her people.
Mm-hmm.
And Johann often told people that Emma was around to basically take his place when he was gone.
Wow.
He was a violent radical. He preached the concept of propaganda of the deed, which means that in order for revolutions to be incited, direct action of some sort must be taken.
Okay.
She worked with him on his radical publications, and he taught her all these public speaking methods, basically how to connect thoughts together and how to like get an audience riled up and really like deliver a message. So she practiced and practiced, and he coached her through stuff. And finally, she gets up on stage and she realizes she has no idea what to say.
Wow. Okay.
She's like, "Oh, fuck. Mine's a blank." It's like when you go to the fridge specifically looking for something and you open up the door and you're like,
Why was I here? Yeah.
Huh. And then you walk away. So she stood there for a minute just thinking, and then it came flowing out. She talked about all of the shit she'd been through. Like it was like a dam broke. And she talked about, you know, her shit job as a seamstress, the abuse, the stuff that she had to deal with in the corset shop, the fact that her father tried to fucking sell her off, the fact that she had been rejected from her family home for being a compassionate human being. All of these things that showed that the world really just didn't give a shit about her. And the ongoing issues and the unfairness of the labor movement, like as a whole. People fucking ate it up. They loved her.
Let me ask the question, if you know. The only thing that's like standing out to me is Johann Most, like the use of violence or any means necessary to instigate change, and yet Emma was opposed to violence.
Right? Remember how I said you needed to remember that thing because we were going to come back and talk about it?
Okay, yes. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a little contradictory. She has an aversion for violence, but, and as we will see kind of a few more times in her life, there are moments that she is connected to people that do support violence, and she would advocate for violence, or she would defend those who took violent actions for the cause of whatever movement. So even though she had a personal aversion to it, she found a way to excuse it a lot.
Okay.
Yes, you pointed exactly on the thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second. It was...
Something's not right here.
Yeah, but there was maybe a means justifying in.
Very much so.
Inside of her surrounding some of these things.
No, and propaganda of the deed didn't always call for violence. Basically, it was like it needs to be catalytic events that force action to be taken. And it doesn't necessarily always mean violence, but violent radicals will do violent radical things and they'll suggest violent radical actions. So that happened.
Okay.
As she learned more, she also realized that she was being used a little more than she wanted to. Johann kept saying that she was going to replace him when he was gone or when he moved on. And she was pretty much parroting all of his words instead of forming her own opinions. Like you said, she's not a fan of violence, but she has now been parroting all of these words by her mentor for
Oh,
propaganda of
yeah.
the deed. She's actually advocating for a thing that she didn't necessarily believe in.
Right.
She asked most for a little more wiggle room on the publications, like in this editorial that they put out. She'd like to
Oh,
actually
okay. Like, let
write
me have more
articles.
of a say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me have more of a say. Let me write some articles, so people can actually hear my voice. But he didn't like that she had the ideas of her own, and eventually told her, "Who is not with me is against me.
Oh boy. Okay.
My way or the highway."
Mm-hmm.
So she left. She took the highway, and she joined another like local competing publication.
Mm-hmm.
She was also growing in her friendship with Alexander, and eventually they became lovers, and they would go on to become activists in the anarchist movement. They tried to start an ice cream shop. They lived with a few people, and a few of them tried to start this cute little ice cream shop like above their house.
Yeah.
But that was around 1892.
Ooh. All right.
So in 1892, another labor
Columbus
issue had
sailed the
struck.
ocean blue. Yeah. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Labor,
Okay.
labor in the 1890s. So it was called the Homestead Strike.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Carnegie and the Carnegie Steel Company came under fire when it refused to deal with a local union. This is kind of a complicated topic. We talked about this before we recorded tonight because we wanted to actually understand. It's not so easily, it's not like readers digestible as easily as I thought it would be.
Right. Well, and first of all, it took me a while to realize that Homestead was a town.
Yep. And the steel
I thought that
company is in Homestead.
Homestead. Yeah. I thought that it was like a strike about homesteading or something. Like, listen, I never claimed to be a smart person.
So to kind of give like a little introduction, Carnegie had a bunch of different steel companies, and in the 1880s, there were some new developments in technological advancements for how steel was made. And so there was this open air furnace that was developed in the town of Homestead, Pennsylvania at the Carnegie Steel Company. And they could use this open hearth to make huge steel beams that they could use in like big naval ships, and they could use in skyscrapers and all sorts of shit that would actually get them really, really exclusive contracts with pretty much anyone they wanted.
Right.
So the town of Homestead was a steel mill working town. There were a bunch of different mills there. There were a bunch of different companies. And by that time, laborers, I'm really trying to Reader's Digest version of this, but
I think you're doing great.
Thank you. By that time, there was the Amalgamated Association of Workers, which was basically the union of kind of the Northeast area. They did Ohio, they did, I think, Illinois, and they had people in Pennsylvania. Right. And in the 1880s, this union dealt in a number of strikes against these other steel companies and won. And so they had really good contracts and they had really good benefits. And
with most of the steel companies in these three
yes, there were workers.
They were very powerful.
They were very powerful. They were very popular. And there were significant numbers of workers from pretty much every steel company that were actually part of this union.
Mm-hmm. And then the Homestead one, those workers, because of the quality and amount of stuff that they were able to put out, that's the part where is that where they tried to renegotiate their contract? Is it because they were able to put out that much stuff?
Kind of. So
Okay.
so there was a strike in 1881, there was a
Hmm.
strike in 1889, and then there was a strike in 1892.
That's a big one.
81 was basically, we just want to get them wages, and we're trying
Right.
to get them like guaranteed raises and kind of things.
Okay. Yes.
89 was a big one because the contract had run out and they wanted all of these new safety precautions and output limits set
Mm-hmm.
for their workers. So they wanted maximum output levels so that the workers would guarantee not to be overworked.
Okay.
And basically by 1892, that union kind of quote unquote owned the city, because most of the steel mills in that area were dealing with negotiating these contracts for these people.
Hmm.
So the Carnegie Steel Company, run by
Hmm.
or owned by Andrew Carnegie, was one of many, many steel companies owned by this man. And in 1881, I don't think coincidentally, a man named Henry, Carnegie assigned a man named Henry Frick to be the manager of this plant. And Frick made absolutely no bones about being anti-union. His goals were to bust unions and make sure that like any employees that they had were dealing directly with the company.
Right. He said, quote, the mills have never been able to turn out the product they should, owing to being held back by the amalgamated men. So essentially, he wanted there to be no limits on how much these factories could could put out, regardless of how much that meant the workers had to actually work to put out that much.
Yes, absolutely. He wanted 24 hours a day production, and he wanted to have everyone basically put in those hours to get as much output as they possibly could. And in
Yeah.
1889, these contracts that got renegotiated. Hold on, I'm going to look at my notes. All right. So here before I get into that, here is what being a member of the amalgamated membership, the amalgamated
The
the
A.
amalgamation of iron and steel workers.
Mm-hmm.
The membership got you uniform national wage scales every year, ensured regulation of working hours, found jobs for its members, set reasonable workload levels and output speeds.
Mm-hmm.
They had, in the 1889 strike, they got like 5,000 townspeople to run sheriff's deputies out of town because of these strikes. So they were very effective. And in the 1889 contract renegotiation, they included in those contracts 58 pages of
Right.
footnotes describing all of the ways in which they had the factories, basically the onus was on the factories to take safety precautions, to ensure workers had their breaks, to ensure daily limitations, to have maximum output levels so that none of their workers were getting overworked.
Mm-hmm.
Frick hated this. He, again, like you said, wanted all of the output all of the time. So the contract between the AA and Carnegie Steel Mill was set to expire on June 30th. So in February, the AA went to Frick and was like, hey, we've noticed that because of all of your output and because of the fact that, you are so profitable, we want to increase these wages for all of these workers. At that point, 20% of the working group of, just over 20% of the working men at the factory were members of this union.
Right. Yes.
So, and again, you didn't have to be part of any one union. You could be part of none. You could be part of one. There were more unions representing the area, but this was a major one. So 20% of their workforce was represented by this one group. They said, we would like a pay increase because your factory is putting out better numbers than ever. You're more profitable than ever. We think that our workers deserve a wage increase. And Frick
Mm-hmm.
said, fuck you. How about a 22% pay decrease?
Yeah.
So they were like, that's insultingly low. And Carnegie said, no, or Frick said, not my problem. So as the months went on, basically at the end of April, Frick said that at the end of May, if they couldn't come to an agreement, he would withdraw recognition of the AA as a labor union.
Right.
Let's get into Carnegie for just a moment because he's kind of a piece of shit in this. He was a public supporter of unions. He spoke out in favor of strikes and of labor movements, all of that.
Right. Publicly.
But in private, he basically agreed with Frick that there were too many workers at the factory. The hours were too short. They needed to have better numbers. And Frick was pretty much like, yeah, you do what you need to do to get rid of this union.
Right. Well, and the reason why
it's costing us too much, basically.
Right.
They're costing us
and
too
much.
I
think you touched on this in our call, that like throughout the time that the Homestead strike went on, that steel mill did not lose all that much money because he also specifically ordered like a lot of production ahead of time. So that
this
the
whole
plant
time
could endure a strike. So he was like, we're going to go under strike. I know we are. Let's amp up production. Like he knew this was coming.
Yeah.
Basically.
And this whole time, so this whole time he's bargaining from February to the end of May. And this whole time he has the factory on increase of output, basically building up their stock so that they can kind of weather the storm. They can absorb that blow and still deliver to the people that they need to deliver to. So already these people are working harder to try and get out more, but the labor is that, and unfortunately, because of that contracts, the labor was getting impacted by all of the other people that were at the other 80% of the workers at the factory.
Right.
They were having to absorb that increase in production with the preparation that this is going to break down. So Carnegie is privately in support of breaking this union because he thinks that it's too expensive and too much trouble. So Frick basically says, I am going to withdraw recognition from this union, or recognition of this union at all, if we can't come to an agreement. How about a slightly smaller pay decrease? And they're like, no, that's not going to work for us. Basically, Frick and Carnegie were determined that the minority must give way to the majority, and the union was being too demanding.
The only part, I don't want to get too deep into that for me.
Go ahead. I can always cut it out. So
it only admitted a small group of skilled workers. It was in its own way an elitist, discriminatory organization that was not worthy of the republic, Carnegie felt.
Yeah.
Like that's how he spoke about the AAA. And I guess I don't know a ton about that. Like, why did only 20% of the people belong to it? Was it because was that union highly discriminatory? I don't know. I don't know a ton.
I don't know that either. I would like to think that possibly it had to do with like the level of skill or the years that they had been in the business or something. But probably the more likely thing was like, it was one of many unions that you could be a part of or not be a part of. And Carnegie just wanted a reason to hate him. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to make a defense for either side.
Yeah.
In addition to all of this extra output, Frick also decided to build a fence, a large barbed wire fence around the entire workers' mill. It featured sniper towers and water cannons. June 28th, 2 days before.
Capable of spraying boiling hot liquid. Like that part blew my mind. Like I'm used to seeing I'm not used to, Jesus Christ, but like you see like fire hoses and whatnot turned on protesters and things like that. But like boiling hot liquid, what the fuck?
That's some medieval shit.
You just have like a lava hose. Like I'm very confused, but okay.
Yeah, that's really weird.
But I mean, I guess in a steel factory, you can come up with all kinds of bullshit.
You can come up with all kinds of hot things.
Yeah.
So June 28th, they
Mm-hmm.
finished the fence.
Yep.
That evening, Frick locked workers out of the plate mill.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day, on June 29th, he locked the steel mill workers out of the entire plant.
Mm-hmm.
The AA sat down on June 30th, the day that the contract was set to expire, and declared that Frick had broken the contract by locking people out a day early.
Mm-hmm.
Workers at other local steel mills, remember this is a steel city or a steel town, so others in the area basically heard about this and immediately went on strike in solidarity with the Homestead Union, or with the Homestead strikers. Not only that, but the Carnegie workers and other cities in other towns around the area at other mills also went on strike. Basically, everyone just said, this is goddamn bullshit.
It also says the Knights of Labor, it seems to be like another union in the city for a different type of, they organized the mechanics and transportation workers. And so those workers also walked out. And so you had steel workers, transportation workers, mechanics, all in Homestead that were walking out, and then workers at multiple Carnegie plants in the region. So that Ohio, Pittsburgh, or that Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois region that you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So like large scale mass walkouts because of this action.
Right. Because of one locked gate.
Yes.
Not only that, but like, it's pretty to boil it down to that. Like one locked gate and thousands of people walk off the job.
Yep. With a very intimidating fence at the front.
Yeah.
All right. So we kind of, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but Homestead basically had the potential for, the strike had the potential for success, but it failed in three really devastating ways. And we're going to kind of go into each of those. So first was the exponential escalation into violence. Second was the politicization of the strike itself. And third is the deep pockets of Carnegie and the fact that they could just weather that storm. So at the beginning of this strike, basically they shut the plant down, and it was right on a river. And so they could surround the plant on the land side with all of the strikers. And then they sent people in ferry boats up the river to basically put a watch on the riverside of the mill to make sure that nothing could come and go. They would kick out people that weren't from in town, that were being too nosy. They would kick out reporters. Like the reporters had a special pass that they could go through the city unharmed. But if they got too nosy or felt like they were too biased towards one side or the other, they'd get kicked out. It was like just fucking crazy. There were just, this is 5,000 people levels we're talking about here.
It looks like it. Like, so like the huge picket lines you were saying, it was in 24-hour shifts. Like there was never a moment where this factory was not being watched by strikers. And then in the town, it was like people walking down streets. If somebody didn't recognize you, they would just stop and ask you, like, are you a scab or a strike breaker? Like, and
ready to throw down.
And if they didn't feel you were honest, they would take your ass out of the town. Like,
because because it's such a small town that everyone knows each other. Everyone knows you're either part of this union or part of that union, or you're a townsperson that is in support of these people.
Right.
So Frick is like, this is not a problem. We're fine. Everything's fine. So he advertises for scab jobs and strikebreaker jobs in Boston, in St. Louis. He even advertises as far as Europe.
Tries to pull a Kellogg's.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And in the meantime, he hires the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which is a very well-renowned detective agency. They were kind of hired thugs, and they were not cheap. He hired 300 of them to be sent down by boat downriver to come to the backside of the steel mill to come and protect the fences so that they could have strikebreakers starting to come to work.
Mm-hmm. This was after the strike. This was after the strikers had sent 11 sheriff's deputies back down the river in a boat, though. Like,
okay, so I don't even mention that because, like, the first couple strikes that they talk about from Homestead, it just seems like it's just they're going to run anyone off. Like the first one, it was like 2,000 townspeople ran a bunch of deputies off, and then when they deputized like another 100 deputies, 5,000 people ran them off. So they were very used to running off the sheriff's deputies. So now they've escalated to Pinkerton Detective Agency, and they're shipping those people down again on the river by boat.
Yeah.
So these, and word gets out right away. It, kind of the only thing that travels faster than a train is gossip. So word gets to them. They send people up the river by boat again. There's exchange of gunfire. The boats that have these detective agencies land ashore. Then there's gunfire exchange between all these sides. They've got to go back to the water. By this time, the townspeople are breaking down these walls that have been erected with these sniper towers and these water cannons. So now they break the fences open. They're able to actually get into the steel mill.
Yeah.
The strikers are using these water cannons and these like other weapons to hurl things at the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons are trying to come up on shore, and they're getting shot at by the strikers. And there are women in the background that are part of the crowd going, "Kill the Pinkertons."
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's insane. So they kind of retreat out to water for a little while. And so the steel workers take these big steel beams and they start erecting these little like scaffoldings so that they can climb out into the river and attack them more.
From like above.
From above. Yeah. They send out like oil drums and set them on fire with the hope that they will eventually go and set these barges on fire. They're putting holes in them. This is an actual battle.
Yeah. And I do want to say,
died, I think.
I do want to say we haven't like specifically stated this. We did say that it's like a detective agency, but the people on the boats were armed, like at least a little bit of some sort. Like
they were sent down to break up this strike to protect it was 300 Pinkerton men, and there was 500 Winchester rifles.
Yeah. And so
something like crazy like that. They were they were armed to the teeth.
Yeah. And so but it was still 300 versus 6,500. Versus over 6,000. And so, I honestly think, I kind of partially think that Carnegie and Frick knew that this would fail, but also knew that it would specifically send in violent strikebreakers, knowing that it would exponentially increase.
I don't know if it was that well thought out. The Pinkertons were already very well known for being hireable strikebreakers in the area. They were hired all over the place for strike breaking efforts.
Yeah.
So this was we're the Walmart of strikebreakers. Everyone just knows our name. Yeah. So I think that was not as calculated a move, but by 9 a.m., the union president asked the sheriff to ask Frick to meet to renegotiate the deal. We don't want this to be any more violent. We don't want to be dealing with these strikebreakers anymore.
Let's
we're done.
Meet up. Can we chill this up?
Yes. But Frick, and this is where I think a lot of the calculation came in. Frick saw the chaos ensuing, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before the tables of public opinion turned. So he refused. Yeah. He was like, "Oh, I'm good."
Yeah.
Because they got so violent so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So the sheriff then asked the governor to send in troops to intervene, as the town had basically run everyone else off. This is a town that's now completely controlled by these strikers and this union.
Mm-hmm.
and we need help. He refused and said that they needed to try harder. So then the strikers asked for help from the governor. And
Yeah.
here's where we get into the politicization of it.
Yeah.
The governor was elected by Carnegie-backed representatives
Right.
and by Carnegie-backed voters. He
Mm-hmm.
was elected. Who was it you were saying? The vice
That
president?
Whitelaw Reid, the Republican candidate for vice president.
Yeah. He wanted to stop this because it was basically hurting Republican interests.
Right.
Carnegie owned the votes of a lot of the people in Pennsylvania. He was a very high class Pennsylvania person. That was just, so there was a lot of political pressure to kowtow to his name.
I mean, he's similar to how very wealthy lobbyists are now. You know, like I don't feel like this is a foreign concept of having like capitalist lobbyists very obviously having politicians doing their bidding.
No, it's not an uncommon thing at all. It's just still just baffling.
Yes.
It's still just upsetting and baffling. But basically, there were a lot of political motivations behind getting these people back to work, renegotiating things, and ending this dispute, this battle, this war between the workers and the owners. Because only more people are going to get hurt, only more lives are going to get destroyed.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. The thing that the governor was feeling. He had been elected with the backing of a Carnegie-supported political machine. He could no longer refuse to protect Carnegie interests.
Yeah.
That's why he got involved.
Yeah. So it wasn't, he had to get involved, and he had to have picked a side because there was no other choice. That was the only way that he was going to stay governor, basically.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the third point of Carnegie had really fucking deep pockets. He could, him and Frick could afford to hire the Pinkerton Detective Agency. They could afford to hire 300 of them. They could, when the militia finally came in, when the governor finally said, okay, we'll send the militia in.
Right.
The strikers went to them with open arms, thinking that they were going to actually get the help that they were asking for.
Right.
And instead, the militia became guardians of the mill.
Yeah.
And they opened the mill back up for scabs to come in and work.
Right. Within half an hour.
Like it was just, we're completely blowing past the part where you asked us for help and you're coming in. No, we're going to go and make sure this place is protected so that scabs can come in and do your jobs and cross these picket lines safely. Basically, it was a endurance contest, and Carnegie had deep pockets, so he could afford to endure. They already had their materials built up. They had their supply, and they only were out of work for a couple weeks before they were able to get people back in.
And, 6,000 steelworkers are intimidating to 300 people on boats, but 6,000 steelworkers aren't intimidating to 6,000 troops.
Exactly.
Like, that's no longer, that's not it's not a battle anymore. There we go.
It's very upsetting. But the final nail in the coffin that really killed this movement is what we are about to talk about. So Emma, not being in Pennsylvania at that time, but being in New York City, was rightly pissed off beyond fucking all reason with the way things went down in the factory fight. The fact that people had died, the fact that it had gotten so violent so quickly, and that it still wasn't working, that Frick was still refusing to come to the table. She and Alexander Berkman were of the same mind when it came to placing the blame of those lives on one person, and it was clearly Henry Frick.
Yeah.
He had to pay, so they began to plot.
Right.
Emma was to stay behind to keep telling the good reasons they had. Basically, once Alexander was going to be arrested, he had to be arrested. She wanted to be free so that she could keep saying, well, he had his reasons and these are those.
Right.
It was,
and they felt like it was payback. They were pissed, but B, they felt like it would be an inspiration for their change, like an inspiration to the steelworkers.
It was literally the embodiment of propaganda by the deed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm going to do the deed. This deed is deserved because he's a terrible person and B, will inspire more change within these workers. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to be here to make sure that everyone hears about it.
Yeah, that the message gets out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they, and because of the fact that they were proud, because of the fact that they wanted to be activists, they were kind of proud of this. They were like, all right, we're finally going to get to actually walk the walk.
Right.
She had another role in terms of funding the scheme. She intended to become a sex worker.
Okay.
One of the many novels that had resonated with her when she was growing up was Crime and Punishment. And if a character in that book could sell herself to support her siblings and her family, why couldn't Emma do the same to help move this political action forward?
Wow.
So she went out looking for a date and caught the eye of a man. He took Emma to a saloon, bought her a beer, gave her $10, and told her that she should quit the business. She just didn't have the knack for it.
I find that so funny. The man's like, here's $10. Give it up, sister.
You're not going to do this.
You are not a good hooker. What an interesting 1890s man.
He's got a good heart. Whatever.
Sure. But does he? Because was he not looking for a hooker? And he was just like, no, ma'am.
He probably saw how completely uncomfortable with herself she was. And he was like, you know what? I'm just going to get her out of the cold and let her down somewhere warm and at least give her a beer.
This is not your vibes, ma'am.
She clearly needs the money. She was incredibly embarrassed and supremely astounded. So she decided to not do that and wrote her sister to ask her for the funds.
Wow.
So back to Homestead, Berkman actually was plotting. Mm-hmm. He came in on July 23rd and snuck into Frick's office. This was back when the mill was actually working again. People were crossing the picket lines. He was able to get in. Mm-hmm. He shot Frick 3 times and stabbed him in the leg, but Frick didn't die. And the workers that were in the office, they were scabs. They turned out they were not fans of their manager being shot and stabbed, so they beat Alexander unconscious. He was arrested, charged with attempted murder, and sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Wow.
So that sucks. You're 23. You've been soundly rejected from most of your family. You've been turned down by the only time you've ever tried to be a sex worker. You're in this tenuous relationship that has now been abruptly paused. And it's because he tried to kill someone that you both wanted to die.
For the cause.
For the cause.
Yeah.
Ooh. It's a lot. So
it is.
And not only that, but the police, convinced of her guilt in the matter, searched her home. And then when they didn't find anything, they convinced the landlord to evict Emma anyway.
Jesus.
The man she still revered as a mentor, Johann Most, is now he gets up on the stage and he's criticizing the plan, basically saying it was fucking stupid and Alexander shouldn't have done that. Don't go and try and kill people, even though he's the person that advocates for propaganda of the goddamn deed. Right. So it pissed Emma off. She's like, stop being a hypocrite. You wanted your people to be for this. And now that this has happened, you are more than happy to
shit on it.
So she went to one of his public events. She got up on stage with a toy horsewhip. in front of the whole crowd, she demanded he explain his betrayal to the very ideals with which he said he lived by.
Mm-hmm.
Johann refused, so Emma hit him with the horsewhip, broke the thing over her knee, and threw the pieces at him.
The hell of like, fuck you, Johann.
She said she later regretted the assault, but reasoned that at the age of 23, one does not reason.
Oh, well, there you go. Fuck you, Johann.
This homestead story, unfortunately, has a very sad ending because of the fact, not because of, but the assassination attempt of Frick was kind of the final nail in the coffin of the homestead strike. And most public opinion did turn away from the strikers as they kind of related the attempt to the union. They hired plenty of new people. All of those advertisements that he had sent out for scabs ended up being very fruitful for him. They hired a bunch of new people, and the union pretty much dissolved. And basically, Carnegie Steel Company said, if you want to come back to work, you come back under the shitty terms that we have offered you. And so they did, basically. They gave up after 95 days of militia, of martial law being declared on the homestead town. Basically, the workers were like, all right, fuck it. We got to go to work anyway, so we'll do this.
Yeah.
It was just such bullshit.
Wow.
And this kind of gave into the whole attempt fizzled, the labor issues continued, and all of this basically devolved into a extreme depression in 1893. It kind of collapsed the whole world. The combination of a bubble in the railroad companies, new veins of silver, and the insistence on getting money in bullion and not paper, for some reason, caused a market and banking collapse. So add to that a lot of agricultural issues with the low crop yields and governance. And this began basically this 4-year period of just extreme depression. By the end of 1893, unemployment would be higher than 20%, and hunger demonstrations would devolve into riots.
Wow.
But this was basically the general attitude when Emma was on the stage. She was still speaking up. She was still going to these events. She was still being a public speaker for the anarchist movement. This feeling around all of her speeches is tense. Workers are ready for work, but also frustrated as hell at all of these low wages and these bad conditions and people that just companies that don't give a shit about you.
Right.
So on August 21st, she spoke in Union Square in New York City to a crowd of 3,000. She encouraged workers to take immediate action.
Yeah.
Quote, well then, demonstrate before the palaces of the rich, demand work. If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. She was arrested a week later, and the officer that took her in told her on the train ride back that he would drop the charges if she would inform on her fellow radicals. So she threw a glass of ice water in his face.
Nice.
Yeah, she's like, fuck you. While she awaited trial, another completely badass lady, Nellie Bly, came to visit her in jail.
Okay.
After interviewing extensively with Emma, she wrote a very positive article about the causes of a woman described as a modern Joan of Arc.
Love that.
Her trial was definitely not fair. The detective who made the arrest offered up a completely different version of Emma's speech, and the jury was intimidated by the extremism of Goldman's beliefs. Again, anarchy is still a thing. The district attorney mussed her character by criticizing her anarchism and her atheism. Even the judge called her a dangerous woman. They convicted her of inciting to riot, and she was sentenced to serve a year at Blackwell's Island Penitentiary, which is just, you're 24 now, and you're in prison.
But yeah, so 1 year in jail, you're 24. Wow.
Yep, it fucking sucks. But she didn't waste a minute of her time in prison. It's almost like she suddenly had a lot of time to read and to learn. So she did that. After getting sick in jail, she befriended the doctor that treated her and started learning about medicine. And during her what would end up being only 10 months in prison, she had correspondence, like she wrote letters and stuff to Thoreau, Hawthorne, Whitman, and Emerson.
Wow.
All these hoity-toity author names that, if I guess you're into poetry and reading, I don't know the difference between them.
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you every single thing that these people wrote, but I recognize every single one of those. Like, I recognize those names.
Yeah, you recognize the names. I just couldn't tell you exactly what they wrote or why they're different.
Yeah.
So after 10 months, she was released early, and almost 3,000 people were there to greet her out of jail.
Ooh.
Yeah, she was popular. She had become a celebrity, and she was overrun with requests for her to give interviews and invitations for her to become a lecturer.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, Emma needed a way to make money. She was out of jail now, but she didn't have any skills to do a job. But while she had been in prison, she had been particularly interested in the fields of midwifery, and massage.
Okay.
The science of both of those fascinated her, and more women in medicine were definitely needed at that time. There were no programs in the US that could teach her either of those fields, so she decided to go over to Europe to go to school.
Right.
While she was there, she attended countless meetings with anarchists along the way. It was like a European tour of anarchy, with the end stop being her school in Vienna. As soon as she got her certifications, she went back to the US and spent the next few years of her life giving lectures and helping with births around the country. In 1899, she went back to Europe and made a friend who helped her organize an anarchist congress outside of Paris.
Okay.
You would think that that'd be a big deal, but it wasn't. That took place in 1900, and afterwards, she and her new friend Hippolyta. I
don't know. It's a dude. Hippolyte?
Hippolyta? I don't know. Hippolyta Havel. They moved back to the States, and he immigrated there and lived with Emma and her friends, basically, guys, in this, big apartment. And Goldman continued to give lectures and help in all of these births around the area.
Okay.
Elsewhere in the 1900s.
Elsewhere.
Apparently, assassination was just a specific and endorsed way to get rid of leadership, because in 1901, this guy named Leon Czolgosz,
okay.
I'm going with Czolgosz, and I'm sorry if it's wrong. I don't care. He assassinated...
It feels Polish.
Yeah. It's Czolgosz. Czolgosz. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
I went to his Wikipedia page.
Does it have a pronunciation?
Yeah.
Nice. So Leon Czolgosz, he assassinated President William McKinley. He was unemployed, severely mentally ill, and when he was arrested, he told the police that he was inspired to assassinate the president because of the powerful words of Emma Goldman.
Oh, boy.
He insisted that she was not part of the scheme, but this was the second assassination attempt that connected her name. So they arrested her and 12 other anarchists that she was living with at the time.
Jesus.
One by one, they were questioned about Czolgosz. He had been in the anarchist scene for a while, he had tried to get close to Emma and her crew, but was super, super weird. And Emma's crew basically thought that he was an infiltrator with given how strangely he behaved. So they kind of rejected him.
Wow.
Basically, they were like, you're trying way too hard. So nah. Yeah. Which I get. One by one, they were all released, but Emma was kept for 2 weeks because of her behavior following the assassination. She offered to be a nurse for the president, who suffered for 8 days before succumbing to the bullet wounds.
Wow.
Not only that, but she also refused to condemn Leon's actions. She was one of the only people to do so, and she stood fast in her stance that he was a severely ill person that was abandoned by his fellow anarchists in the movement in the moment that it mattered.
Right.
She thought he was a forgotten one. Because of this, she earned the name of the High Priestess of Anarchy. It was at this point in Emma's life that the tides of support for anarchism began to ebb.
Yeah.
Leon was convicted and executed for the assassination. Emma was devastated and retreated into her life as a nurse. She changed her name to E.G. Smith and worked with a number of private clients. But, as is the eternal frustration of every activist, she wasn't able to stay away for long. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 2.
Ooh. Okay.
It's going to be a two-parter, and going to get more into labor, more into anarchism and its failings and its goals. I think it's a great idea, and we will go into that as well.
Yeah, I love and am pulled towards the idea that humans care for their community out of a want to do so. I love that
obligation.
idea.
Yeah. We're going to go into that. We're going to go into that a lot.
But it's extremely difficult to see in practice. It really is.
And it's specifically because people like Clay, or people like Carnegie, and people like Frick will always exist.
Yeah.
No matter what. So it's unfortunately broken from the start because there will always be those people. But we will get a lot more into that, and we will get more into syndicalism and the growth of the labor movement. I know that these are two very different things. The labor movement and anarchism are two competing ideas, but her efforts grew around the same time as the labor movement grew, and their goals were kind of parallel, but where anarchism was more of an like a moral desire to help, syndicalism and the labor movements is like keep everyone honest through paperwork.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, we will record that soon.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us for Emma Goldman Part 1. We will be back very soon with Emma Goldman Part 2. And once you're hearing this one, I feel like our Space Babes episode is out.
Yeah.
So I am excited to hear what you guys think about that one. I really had a lot of fun covering that topic too. So
I'm so excited. Fun to research.
I'm really thrilled and optimistic about what we might be able to do with this podcast this year. So I am really glad to have the 6 of you listening.
Very happy about it.
Yeah. And, just keep doing your best. Hold on to 2022 as gently as you can.
And be nice to yourself.
Yeah.
The world is shit and bills will still be there tomorrow.
They will.
Yeah.
So take it easy. We will talk to you soon for Emma Goldman Part 2.
All right. Bye.